Hello, friends, and welcome to Reading on the Rock at Covenant United Methodist Church in Rochester, New York. I'm Reverend Ann Kemper, pastor here at Covenant. Tonight, Valerie Clark will read a series of poems written from the point of view of the poet Langston Hughes. The poems, written by someone influenced by Hughes, describe key events in his life. The descriptions of the discrimination Hughes faced got the book banned from some school libraries.
Good evening. This evening I'm going to read the collection of poems, and it's entitled Love to Langston by Tony Medina, illustrated by R. Gregory Christie, and it's published by Lee and Low Books of New York, New York. Shall we begin? Love to Langston. Langston Hughes, an African-American poet, was given the name James Langston Hughes, but he was known throughout his life as Langston Hughes. Was born on February 1st, 1902 in Joplin, Missouri, to Carrie Langston Hughes and James Nathaniel Hughes. And we will begin with a poem called Little Boy Blues. Now, just a little bit about this poem. Langston Hughes had a lonely childhood. His parents had separated when he was only 1 year old, and his father moved to Mexico, where he began a business in mining. His mother was a kindergarten and primary school teacher, but because there were not many jobs for school teachers who were Black, she had to go to various places, and he moved about all the time. His grandmother, his mother's mother, decided that it would be best if he stayed with her, which he did, and had a more settled life. Langston Hughes, with his grandmother, they stayed together until he was 17. Sometimes she didn't allow him to go out and play because she was afraid that he would be harmed by some of the things white people would say. White children, often said mean things to him and chased him, throwing bottles at him. Let's listen to the poems in this book entitled Love to Langston by Tony Medina, illustrated by R. Gregory Christie, and published by Lee and Low Books in New York. Love to Langston. Little Boy Blues. Little boy, little boy, little boy blues. Why can't I go out to play too? Little boy blues. Little boy, little boy, little boy blues, reading and dreaming and watching grandma snooze. The white kids chase me 'cause of the color of my skin, said the white kids chase me 'cause of my brown skin. Little boy, little boy, little boy blues, where's mama at and papa at, little boy blues? Why can't I go out to play too? Little boy blues. His grandmother, whose name was Mary Patterson Leary Langston, was also an abolitionist. She, as Harriet Tubman, was considered a conductor for the Underground Railroad. She helped slaves escape to the North. When Langston was a child, she would sit him on her lap, wrapped in her shawl, and tell him these real-life stories. Langston never forgot her stories, and years later, he wrote about them in a poem called Aunt Sue's Stories. The model for that poem that he wrote lives in this poem, Grandma Stories. Listen to this. Grandma Stories. Grandma has a head full of stories. She has a whole heart full of stories. All day long when Mama's away, Grandma wraps me in her special shawl and tells me her stories. Black people stolen from Africa into slavery. Black people with no rights working for free. Black slaves who escaped on the Underground Railroad. Not a choo-choo train with a running engine, but black folks and white folks working together to bring slaves from the South up north to freedom. Grandma fills me full of stories. She thrills me with her stories of how she is African, French, and Cherokee, and how they tried to kidnap her into slavery. Grandma tells me her stories wrapped in her shawl that has its own story with its bloodstains and bullet holes, and all from her husband who was killed with John Brown at Harper's Ferry. Oh, I know Grandma's stories are true. They didn't come from school or any book. Grandma was there fighting for freedom too. First grade. How many of you have been in first grade before? How many are in first grade right now? I want to tell you about this story, or I'm going to read this poem to you about first grade for Langston Hughes. When he entered school in Topeka, Kansas, he was one of the only black child in his class. This all-white school, the principal told Langston's mother that he could not go there because he was black. His mother would not accept that. She decided to fight for his rights, and that she did. She went on to win the case to have her child attend this school because the school for all black children was much too far a distance for him to walk. While in first grade, he met up with things that were uncomfortable. He met up with racism. His teacher once told the class that they should not eat licorice candy because if they did, they would turn black like Langston. First grade. In Topeka, Kansas, the teacher makes me sit in the corner in the last row, far away from the other kids. She rolls her eyes and sucks her teeth with heavy, heavy sighs, and lies and lies. She tells one kid not to eat licorice or he will turn black like me. When Mama finds out she takes me out of school, she rolls her eyes and sucks her teeth with heavy, heavy sighs. And why? 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 How would you feel if you were sitting in the back all by yourself while the other students sat together? Not a good feeling. You might ask, why? The next poem I will read is called Jim Crow Row. Langston learned from his mother and grandmother to stand up for what he believed in. When he was in 7th grade, all of the black students were made to sit in the last row or the back row, and all the white children were in the front rows. The teacher taught, too, the white children in the front rows. Langston believed this was unjust and unfair, and he organized a protest. The protest consisted of making banners that said, "No Jim Crow." Langston was not allowed back in the school until his mother met with the principal. Langston and his mother won the case, and he was allowed back in school, and the teacher was made to integrate the teaching for all students. Jim Crow Row. In the 7th grade in Lawrence, Kansas, the teacher puts all us black kids in the same row, away from all the white kids. I don't roll my eyes or suck my teeth with a heavy, heavy sigh and a why. I make signs that read, Jim Crow row, Jim Crow row. We in the Jim Crow row. Jim Crow is a law that separates white and black, making white feel better and black feel left back. So we protest with our parents and let everybody know about Jim Crow, not allowing us to grow. Jim Crow, don't put us in a Jim Crow row. Libraries, that's the name of the next poem you will hear. How many of you go to the library? I used to love going to the library. It was a place where I could do adventures into books. I bet you like it too. Some of us get our books online. That's good too. But going into the library is something that maybe you should take a chance at doing. Langston loved going to the library. He did that with his grandmother and mother. What he did, he found poetry to be most fascinating from a very young age. After his grandmother died, he didn't visit the library as much, but he did continue to spend some time there. And throughout his childhood and teenage years, books were his company. Books comforted him during his times of loneliness and isolation. Let's listen to the poem, The Library. Libraries. Libraries are a special place for me, with their long tables, all smooth and shiny, and bookcases spilling over with books filled with wonderful words. Libraries are a special place for me to sit and to stay with books and books and books of endless, beautiful words, keeping me company, taking my loneliness and blues away. So far, you've noticed that the poems go from beginning in first grade, then it goes to seventh grade, and guess where we're going now? High school. It's called In High School. Langston went to Central High School in Cleveland, Ohio. In this class, he was the only black student, but he felt at home. He made friends with other children his age, and they were mostly immigrants from Europe, which helped make up for his lonely times in childhood in his elementary years. He graduated with honors. In his high school years, he was also filled with big decisions and hardships. When he visited his mother, sometimes she felt that he needed to stay with her and help out. He did sometimes, but couldn't do that all the time. She wanted him not to be a poet, which is what he longed to do. He decided that he would finish school, and that he did. In high school, I live in a white neighborhood, go to a white school, but I don't feel out of place. I feel like I have found a home. My friends are white, but outsiders like me, 'cause their parents are immigrants from Russia, Poland, Italy, and Hungary. I run track, do the high jump, join the relay team, act in the school play, write poems and stories for the school magazine. I'm a scream. But I have to grow up fast, 'cause Mama wants me to quit school and work. It doesn't make any sense to me. How could I get a job without a degree? I have to make a tough decision. To work at 16 would be a prison. I take an attic room in Cleveland, eat hot dogs and sticky rice each night, trying not to freeze while I study, work on my poems, and read myself to sleep. I have some high times and low times, some fast times and slow times, some real stop and go times. It's my I'm running out of time to be a kid gotta grow time. Wow, he struggles with things. Some things we struggle with too. The next poem that is in this series is called I Do Not Like My Father Much. That might get you right here. Maybe a little difficult to listen to, but let's stay in it together. Remember I told you that Langston's father and mother separated and his father lived in Mexico. Well, he didn't get to see his father very much between the ages of 5 and 17. But he was able to visit his father when he was 17 because his father sent for him. And remember, his father lived in Mexico. Langston was so excited about spending time with his father. But almost as soon as he met him, he was upset with his father, especially the way the father acted, his attitude, his demeanor. His father was very angry and bitter about the way things were in his life, about racism, about poverty. But his father also blamed black people for their circumstances. He blamed poor people too. That didn't sit well with Langston. His mother and grandmother didn't speak that way. They always had hope. His father was very wealthy, but his father let him know that he would help him financially if he went to college and became an engineer. That writing poetry was not something he supported. This greatly affected how Langston felt because he didn't want to be an engineer. He wanted to be a poet. But his father paid for him to go to Columbia University. Langston accepted that. But there, after 1 year, he decided to leave because the campus and the work had to do with math and engineering, and those classes took away from his writing. His dream was to pursue the life of a poet. Langston's father refused to support him on that, but Langston went on anyway. Let's listen to I Do Not Like My Father Much. I do not like my father much. I do not like my father much. He is selfish and angry and calls black people such and such. I do not like what he has to say, that writing poems for a living will not pay. I do not like what my father wants me to be, a miner of silver in Mexico, a graduate with an engineering degree. I want to be my own man, go to Harlem and become a poet for black people and poor people, those my father calls such and such. In Harlem, I sent him a letter, choosing poetry over college. He chooses to do me one better, never sending me another letter. My father is a man who could not do what he wanted to do or be what he wanted to be, so he takes out his pain on everyone, even his own family. His anger causes me pain just the same. No, I do not like my father much. Let's listen to this poem, Leaving Harlem for Africa. Leaving Harlem for Africa deals with the fact that after Langston dropped out of Columbia University, he decided to seek adventure through travel. At the age of 21, he boarded a ship called the West Heseltine, which set sail for Africa on June 13th, 1923. He got a job on the ship to pay for his way there. He decided to learn about the world, not through books, but through travel, meeting new people and learning about different cultures. Guess what he did? he threw his books overboard. These books were primarily his school books and some of the books from his childhood. Langston kept one book, Leaves of Grass. It was a collection of poetry, you are right, by Walt Whitman. It was his favorite poet. Let's listen to Leaving Harlem for Africa. Leaving Harlem for Africa. Leaving Harlem for Africa in search of myself, I throw my books over the ship into the black mouth of the sea. The water must be hungry 'cause it swallows those books down mean. I am letting go of my past like tears dropped from my face one by one. Books I read as a lonely, lonely child, books I hardly read at college, uptown in Harlem, running wild. I want to change myself and grow, set out on my own journey, nothing left but my imagination and memory. Learn from experience, not just books. Leaving Harlem for Africa, I stare at the mouth of the great big sea, swallowing my books. Glad it ain't me. Let's listen to All My Life. I travel the big seas, working on ships to pay my fee. Countries and continents welcome me. In Paris and Africa, Russia and China, I go around the world like a miner, not the kind my father wants me to be. In Mexico with an engineering degree, but a miner searching for riches from people of all races, discovering other voices and places. Going around the world claiming poets from other nations, translating their sonnets and stories into something I can dig, yeah. Going around the world, digging life is my gig. When I'm not overseas, I'm in Harlem with writers, artists, and musicians, mapping out a world of laughter and strife, celebrating the beauty of Black life. In this next poem, which is called Harlem is the Capital of My World, we're going to find out what Langston Hughes meant by that. Harlem is a part of New York City, stretching from the East River to the Hudson River. In the early 1920s, Harlem became the center for the Black world, the primary location of Black cultural expression and white patronage. This was the era known as the Harlem Renaissance, a vibrant and vital period when Black writers, artists, musicians, actors, and poets flourished. Langston first set foot in Harlem on September 4th, 1921, at the age of 19. He lived in Harlem on and off throughout his life, and it was the place where he found inspiration for many of his works. In 1948, Langston moved to 20 East 127th Street and lived there for the rest of his life. Let's listen to Harlem is the Capital of My World. Look at this illustration. It looks busy. Harlem is the capital of my world. Harlem is the capital of my world, Black and beautiful and bruised like me. Harlem has soul. It's where Black people care about Black people, and everybody's child belongs to the community. Where we be styling and profiling, with concrete streets stretched out under our feet and boulevards broad and spread like a red carpet for royalty. The king of swing, the Duke of Ellington, the empress of the blues. Harlem is a bouquet of Black roses, all packed together and protected by Blackness and pride. Harlem is where I reside, where I work and stride. My dark community from the East River to St. Nicholas Avenue, with nightclubs and cabarets spilling over with jazz and bluesy urban spirituals. It's no miracle we survive. Why I fell in love with Harlem before I ever got there. Yeah, Harlem is where I be, where I could be. Me. Harlem is the capital of my world. Jazz makes me sing. Can you hear that a little bit? That's called jazz. In this poem, jazz and the blues were a great influence on Langston's work. He was one of the first American poets to experiment with these distinctly American musical forms created by Black people. While Langston was living in France in 1923, he worked washing dishes at a club. He was swept away by the sounds of jazz and the blues, which inspired him to write poems in his head as he scrubbed the dishes. He heard jazz and the blues live at clubs and on the radio. The force of this exuberant music inspired him to create new poetic forms. Let's listen to the poem, Jazz Makes Me Sing. Wow, look at this. Looks like somebody's enjoying themselves. Jazz makes me sing. Let's listen. Jazz makes me sing and swing, and the blues is my muse. Jazz grabs me by the collar and makes me holler. It spins me around, beating in my bones like a heart full of sound. Jazz hypnotizes me with its blue bop de blee, blue bop de bee. Ooh wee, that blue bop de blee, blue bop de blam. The blues celebrates the bruised with sad stories and funny sounding news. It makes me think about my sadness and how I ain't alone. Yeah, it makes me think about my sadness and how I ain't alone. The blues makes me feel a whole lot better. It hits my heart in the funny bone. This poem is called Poetry Means the World to Me. Poetry was the central passion of Langston's life. The poets Langston was drawn to wrote for the common, everyday people who worked and struggled to get by. People like those he knew growing up. Poets Carl Sandburg and Walt Whitman, who used the speech patterns, rhythms, and language of the people, were great influences on him. Langston was one of the first American poets to successfully capture and use jazz, the blues, and common speech in his poems. He also celebrated people who normally were not written about. Langston published his first book of poetry, The Weary Blues. He went on to publish 13 volumes of poetry, win the prestigious Spingarn Medal, and became recognized as a world-class poet. Wow, can you see Langston, the writer, his rough drafts, papers that he's just dropped on the floor, maybe because he wanted to do it better. Do you know what this is? It's a typewriter. I remember the days. Now we have laptops. Poetry means the world to me. Poetry means the world to me. It's how I laugh and sing, how I cry and ask why. Poetry comforts me when I use jazz and the blues or the way regular folks talk, the language they use. Words don't always have to be neat and polished like a statue. They should be used and used and used to say what you like or don't like, what you see, think, or feel. Words to fight against hate and unnecessary suffering. Poetry is what I use to say, I love you. This poem made me chuckle just by its name, A Bag of Oranges. As Langston got older, he was a big influence and supporter of younger writers and poets. Alice Walker who went on to become a very famous author herself, especially after her novel, The Color Purple, was published, once visited Langston when he was very ill. None of Langston's friends, family, or the public knew he was critically ill, for Langston led a very private life. When Alice Walker came to visit the ailing older writer, she brought him a bag of oranges. Langston, who considered Alice Walker one of the best young writers he knew, was moved by the sweet gesture of this woman in her early 20s. Langston Hughes died on May 22nd, 1967, at the age of 65. A bag of oranges. A bag of oranges is what she brings me, with a great big dimply grin, sweet as a Georgia peach, come to see me on my deathbed. With her hand outstretched, palm up, orange big and bright as the sun, as if death to her is a new day, she brings the sun. That child makes the pain of my illness go away this day. Dear sweet Alice Walker, one of my favorite young writers, brings me a bag of oranges. Brings me oranges like a bag of sun. This is the last poem for this evening, and it's called Sometimes Life Ain't Always a Hoot. Langston survived many challenges in his life. He had problems with loneliness, isolation, racism, but his spirit remained high. He was filled with optimism and hope. He kept focused and moving forward with his work. In his well-known poem, Mother to Son, the narrator, a mother, says to her son, "Life to me ain't been no crystal stair." Langston thought about that often, and in the poem, Sometimes Life Ain't Always a Hoot, expresses his hope and joy. Let's listen. Look at this illustration. Seems like some kids are waiting to hear what Langston has to say. Sometimes life ain't always a hoot. Sometimes life ain't always a hoot or a holler. But if you manage to give it a bother, even if you miss your mother or don't like your father, there'll be better days up ahead. A whole mess of happening days up ahead. You can sit and suck your teeth and sigh, or love and laugh and live life by and by. I hope you enjoyed those poems you heard in the book called Love to Langston. I want to leave you with this thought. Langston survived many challenges as he went through life. He had challenges and problems with loneliness, with isolation, and yes, with racism. But his great spirit, filled with optimism and hope, kept him focused and moving forward with his work. Langston always felt that even though life can be difficult, one must always look on the bright side. Tomorrow may have its challenges, but it also promises to be new and different. There's always hope.
Thank you, Val, for reading those powerful poems. Please pray with me. Loving God, thank you for the life of Langston Hughes and for those brave enough to write honestly about his life. May we all be inspired to overcome obstacles and to do something good. Amen. Join us next week as we read another banned book. Good night.
Reading on the Rock is presented by Covenant United Methodist you like Reading on the Rock, please give a donation on our website, covenantroc.org.